best podcast, the Idlecast.
In the great hall of the Justice League, there are assembled the world's greatest heroes, created from the cosmic legends of the universe.
Scott McDermott, Harrison Perkins,
And
Scott Clark.
their mission to fight injustice, to right that which is wrong, and to serve all mankind.
We'll do it live. We'll do it live.
Good morning, boys. How are you?
So good.
I am better than I was 2 days ago.
Yes, you were hinting at that you've perhaps not been well. What's happening? You look fine to me. You don't look green or anything.
Looks can be deceiving.
Well, I'm bouncing back today. Sunday morning. I was fine Saturday. Don't know what happened. Woke up Sunday morning. Felt awful. I mean, head, stomach, every part of me. Awful. Freezing cold.
Yeah.
A new one for me. So I mean, still, it's too late at that point. You've got to go and preach.
Yeah. Infect the whole congregation with whatever you have.
Thankfully, I'm far enough away that everything is just going to fall kind of right on the steps in front of the pulpit. That if I get it that far. But first time experience for me, I kept a big cup under the pulpit in case I puked everywhere.
Had to hurl.
Yeah. Which was not the comfort you might think having that there to catch it might be, but
Well, and now everything's on video, so there's, everything's preserved for posterity.
that's true. I had it planned. I was like, you've got to crouch. If that happens, you've got to crouch. Like you can't
Yeah.
keep your head visible. You got to get it below the bulwarks, right?
These are the things that people don't think about. They don't know sometimes. Yeah, we've all had to preach when we were ill with a fever or whatever. I know I'd been in the pulpit when I shouldn't have been, but there really wasn't any alternatives. So you just sort of take a lot of, over-the-counter medications and power through for a couple of hours, then go home and collapse.
I know why you were sick too. You got into those Cadbury eggs a little bit early, didn't you? Those things will destroy you.
Crammed too many of the Reese's eggs, on Saturday night, and it just
No, you can't have too many of those.
Yeah.
It was the Cadburys.
I know I slept the rest of the day, son. It was definitely a day of rest. I slept 4 hours,
Yeah.
woke up for 3, and went back to bed as soon as we put our son to sleep, and slept the whole night.
So were you okay on Monday, yesterday?
I was better, but not all the way. Today I'm feeling pretty strong. Yesterday I was not at full speed. I have no food has sounded good since Sunday. So we're recording Tuesday morning. Since Sunday morning, I have eaten 1 piece of bread and 1.5 Pop-Tarts. Just all of it sounds awful.
And yet, here you are. So, listener, this is a sign of Dr. Perkins' commitment to the Idlecast Superfriends.
I love you all, listeners.
Perseverance, dedication.
I love these two guys even more than our listeners, though. It's good to spend time with them.
Aw.
I'm a sweet guy. What can I say?
You're going to make Scott cry. He's so sentimental.
I'm crying on the inside already.
Yeah, exactly. How are you, Scott McDermott?
So good. How are you?
I'm okay. I'm still pain-free and thankful.
Praise God.
Able to pick things up now and carry them around. So I'm happy about that.
Take it easy now. Don't get ahead of yourself.
There is that. Yes, I get little reminders, little stings that just say, hey, don't
Would that
don't
be your
do
nervous system?
That'd be a nerve that would be sending me just little pinpricks that reminders to be good and behave myself. So. Before we dive into the questions, I have a question. I want you to listen to this and I want your feedback. Ready? 3, 2, 1, let's go.
YouTube and the visual component of podcasting has turned into something that wasn't anything when I started. Nobody really needed to see you podcast. They just need to hear you podcast. I still am a little confused as to why they need to see you podcast, but for some reason, it's turned into a large aspect of podcasting, which to me, I'm a little sad about, because I really like the notion of speaking and you putting earbuds in and going for a hike and just listening to what I'm saying versus, sitting on your phone, waiting at an airport, watching what I'm saying.
I really, really agree with Adam Carolla about this. And I heard this video and I thought, I really agree with this. And we started podcasting about the same time. People actually listen to Adam Carolla as opposed to me. But I understand. I mean, I started in radio in 1970 something, and got my first paying gig in the summer of 79. Was kind of an intern for a few years before that. And so I've always loved radio, always listened to the radio, and the whole business of theater of the mind and all of that. And now people are more or less demanding me. We're on YouTube at Heidelcast, so I'm happy about that. And people are listening, and we're getting a bunch of traffic to the Heidel blog from YouTube, which is kind of a mystery. It's actually now, most of the last week, it's been our number one source of inbound traffic is YouTube. And it doesn't necessarily seem to be coming from our site, so it's kind of a mystery. I set the tech person to find out what is going on. Anyway, so I heard that and I thought, you guys, being younger than I, right, much younger since I was born in the previous century.
Well, we all were.
I think we were too.
Were you all? Okay, why do you always say it to me like it's only I?
Well, I don't know, partly just because it's amusing, but
I guess that's true. I guess you were born. But you kept saying it. I thought I just started thinking of you as being from this century and myself from the
I don't think we
century
started ministry in this century, and that's usually the context where we're dropping that.
Okay.
I think we're all more closely related to the 16th and 17th centuries than we are to the 21st, to be honest. So.
Okay. So I am struggling to understand why people need to see me sitting in the studio with headphones on, which is kind of a funny look, Then there's this pressure to find some other kind of headphones so you don't have the sort of big comfortable headphones. You have to wear uncomfortable headphones.
And the microphone right in front of the camera.
And the microphone. It's a thing. That's the other interesting thing. So there are all these video podcasts where people are sitting in front of their Shure SM7B microphones, which have turned out to be the sort of go-to podcasting microphone. And then sometimes people with headphones and sometimes people without. So then they can't hear what's going on. They have no idea what's actually being recorded. And anyway, which is why you wear headphones, so that you know that what you think you're doing, you're actually doing.
I like both. I think there's some shows that I will watch and there's some shows that I will listen to. And if it's a show that I like to watch, I appreciate the fact that they also put it on as a podcast, just an audio podcast. I'm with you. I like the theater of it. I like sound effects. Well, for example, Chris Gordon has a really good podcast, but it's a video podcast.
Yeah.
Right? And I think everybody likes looking at that library, the books, the old books, that wonderful table he's got. And but if you can't watch, you can always listen. Here is the benefit, though, if I can throw this in.
Yeah.
If I had seen who was speaking on that clip, I would have known that it was Adam Carolla and not Hugh Hewitt, because I actually thought that was Hugh Hewitt.
Really?
No kidding.
He doesn't sound anything like Hugh Hewitt.
I haven't listened to Hugh Hewitt for a decade, and that to me was what he sounded like. And I said, why is Hugh Hewitt talking about this? Oh, well, let's just roll with it.
Oh, that's interesting. No, that's Adam.
He could have
Carolla.
spoken for an hour and I wouldn't have figured it out.
That audio I took from what was actually a video podcast. So,
Well, the irony that I thought was going on there was that you said, I listened to this video, and here we are talking about listening to a video.
oh, interesting.
And,
Yeah.
there's that kind of fourth wall aspect to the whole discussion that we have right now.
It's true. I saw that on social media, and I thought, boy, I really agree with that. He's doing it. He's submitting to what people say they want.
Well, one of the things I love about you is that you're in this whole discussion, because you've been doing this for a while on the blog, on social media. And it's like you're resisting what is to say, this is what it should, this is how you should like your media.
Yeah, it's true. I just think it's weird that people want to look at me or anyone if we're not actually doing anything. If we were I don't know. And maybe it's because so many of them are two-headed shows now, where, you know, you have two
I think
people
that's a big part
talking.
of it. But, you know, nonverbal communication is such a big part of the human experience. Like that, I think it does bring something, even if it's optional. You know, you can gain a lot from an audio-only podcast, but there is something that you can gather, especially from kind of conversation-based podcasts, by seeing the person and what they're doing with their face. I mean, I've recorded some podcasts that are audio only, but they always say, we're going to run the video while we're talking so that we can see each other and you know, keep up with, you know, this helps us monitor what we mean to one another. And so there's that dynamic. And even for you, I mean, there are so many, I remember from class, there are so many ways, like you even just hold your hands, that leave an impression about the way you speak. And I get it. I'm not saying it has to be. I'm just saying I do understand how
It's nice when there's an option.
Yeah,
The
this is
production
helpful.
value of Heidelcast is, you know, you can't find that anywhere else. So when you think Heidelcast, you're listening to like an old-fashioned radio show. When I say old, I'm spelling it with an E at the end. An oldie, timey
from before the
radio
previous
podcast.
century.
And some of us grew up with that stuff, so we like it. I grew up listening to Jim Rome. That's you don't want to watch Jim Rome. His TV shows weren't great. It was his audio that you wanted to hear. So,
you know, this helps me. This broadens my horizon a little bit. That's why I wanted to raise this. I thought you guys would be the perfect ones to try to help me understand. So you have. Thank you. I have a theory too, and I think
you're welcome.
Part of it is grounded in the fact that we live in a culture where the dominant way of interpreting texts of whatever sort, audio, visual, you know, messages, we interpret messages with a hermeneutic of suspicion. And I'm. It's not enough for me just to listen to you. I need to see you to make sure you're not doing anything bad to me. Maybe
doing anything bad to me?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's just a general sense of distrust, particularly since COVID. I think it's gotten worse since COVID.
It brings a sense of, I know you, and brings me a little bit closer to you. There's probably also just an attention span. There's motion in video.
Only Scott McDermott's the only one who actually moves or does anything as he's doing right now.
I think people would hate to see me. I know I bounce when I'm not actually talking.
He's doing Frankenstein hands.
The interesting thing is, here, listen to this.
I'm listening.
When it comes to books, people now listen to books.
Yeah, they do.
But they watch radio shows. How weird is that?
That's a great point. And with that, we need to open the coffer. So,
ladies and gentlemen, the Super Friends.
All right, I am opening the coffer, reaching in, pulling out the actual paper. And the first one is from John, and it says, "Greetings, Reformed Super Friends." Ephesians 4:11 from the ESV.
Greetings.
Ephesians 4:11 from the ESV.
It's funny because you're like always just a half a beat too late.
Which is good. That was the secret to Ringo's drumming, right? One of the little known secrets to Ringo. Ringo was a great drummer. Not a great singer, but a great drummer. Although I have several songs of his that I enjoy very much. Photograph is a great record. Anyway, he was always just slightly behind, intentionally slightly behind, and it gave a great sound. So you are the Ringo of our Beatles, Scott McDermott.
The three Beatles.
Okay.
Thank you.
Ephesians 4:11, and he gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the shepherds, and teachers. And John says, "I affirm that the New Testament office of prophet was extraordinary and has ceased. However, could you help me understand, was the New Testament office of prophet different from the Old Testament office of prophet? If so, how?" Thank you for your help. All right. Interesting question. And Scott's over there directing traffic like an air marshal, and he's wheeling
Now he's
Harrison.
dodging the plane coming in. I thought he was. I thought he was asking to answer it, but then it.
He's ducking. He's disappeared
Swung
from
back
the
to me.
screen. He does not want to.
I mean, my first thought is not fundamentally, but there is probably a difference in execution to a degree. At least one of the big picture things about the Old Testament prophetic office that I was taught in seminary, and that seems to have been substantiated in some articles and that sort of thing that I've read since then, is that the Old Testament prophet was functioning as covenant prosecutor, right? As the people of God under the Mosaic covenant had broken the covenant and had various infractions against its requirements. And so a lot of the prophetic literature is bringing indictment and prosecution.
Yeah.
And given that there are some differences in the way that the external administration of the Old Covenant and New Covenant are structured, not entirely, but there aren't quite as many things. I mean, we are promised that this covenant cannot be broken. And so the people of God can't lose their place as the people of God in the new covenant. And so any sort of similarity in what they are doing as prosecutor means, well, it's not going to look exactly the same way. So there's calls to account. There's certainly bringing the inspired word of God, and there is some predictive elements, but it doesn't have quite the same tone in all throughout. And so that's kind of my first impression on that.
Don't you think it's the case, Med, that there's a little bit more ambiguity about what the New Testament prophet is than there is in the Old Covenant particularly? So when I say Old Covenant, and I think when Paul says Old Covenant and Hebrews says Old Covenant, it refers specifically to the Mosaic period of the administration of the covenant of grace under the types and shadows, which is, I think, what you were implying in your comments about prophets. They have a specific role or a role that's unique to the national, typological, theocratic administration.
Yeah, I think I said under the Mosaic covenant.
Oh, you did? Okay, all right.
I think.
I just looked up the word ambiguity, and I agree with you.
So I think it helps to keep reading here, as always, verse 12, and then here, I'm going to move the comma. The ESV has the comma after ministry, which I think is not right. To equip the saints, comma, for the work of ministry, comma, so maybe just add one, for building up the body of Christ until we all attain to the unity of the faith. So I think these prophets had this work of edification. It's their principal function in the apostolic period. When the canon was still being formed, remember that most of the church probably, Steve Baugh disagrees, I think, a little bit with this, so that's worth bearing in mind. He thinks, it seems, that the congregations probably got copies of the various New Testament documents earlier than one typically reads in the literature. But going by the standard picture, and as far as I know from what I'm able to tell from my reading, for example, reading the Apostolic Fathers, it's pretty clear that some of them had access to some texts very early on, but not to others. Right, so that seems to illustrate the limits of copying and transmission of the text. So it's going to be a while into the second century, probably more than 50 years, right? So AD 150, 60, 70, before people really begin to have access to the whole New Testament. In that case, the prophet, particularly in the canonical period, when Scripture is being given, has a really important role, but not quite the same role as Harrison was saying of the Old Testament prophet. It's at once, in a way, broader and also narrower. The other thing I've been thinking about lately, and I need to pursue this a little more, is that the 16th and 17th century writers frequently took prophecy merely to refer to preaching and not necessarily to receiving extra canonical revelation. So because of our context, the influence of Pentecostalism, and the way prophet is often taken today, and maybe correctly, but maybe not, if the earlier, older writers are correct, we take it that these people were receiving extra-canonical revelation immediately. And that may be the case. I'm not saying one way or the other, but it's also interesting to think about the fact that there may have simply, maybe a way of describing people who were exhorting, people who were preaching, and in that way encouraging the congregation. So that would, if that's true, then that would be a significant difference from the Old Testament prophets.
Another difference, perhaps, and maybe you already mentioned it, but the Deuteronomy 18, essentially saying, here is the office. And I think you don't really have that with New Testament prophets. There's kind of like already prophets in the book of Acts. There's just like, hey, there's a prophet. Hey, there's some prophets. And then, of course, you've got the prophets that are developing or helping develop the canon, like, Jude, James, the author of Hebrews, those kind of prophets, which are different than, say, Agabus and the daughters of Philip, but they're all prophets. So,
yeah, exactly. I think that's right. I mean, Agabus is both an interesting case and an illustrative case. For what it's worth, I think Grudem's understanding of Agabus, he's tried to do way too much with Agabus. If you want to know more about that, there is stuff on the Heidel blog about Agabus and continuing revelation. And there's a whole series, listener, if you're interested in this, if you want to know, well, what do you guys think about, or at least what does Clark think about continuing revelation? Check out the Heidelcast series, right? Heidelblog.net/feathers. Heidelblog.net/feathers. And there's a whole series going through the whole issue of continuing revelation.
Well, let's read some emails, shall we?
All right, let's see. So this is from Brian, who said, thanks for responding to my question on political sermons a few months back. I appreciated the response. I wanted to ask you a practical question about the nature-grace distinction. So that caught my attention right away. I thought, okay, here's somebody who's paying attention. This is a thing that I've been writing about and talking about on the Heidelcast for several years now, trying to get people to pay attention to this distinction between nature and grace. And so, in that regard, he asks, are there inherently sinful forms of music? I know this might sound a little naive, but I can't reconcile in my head someone who listens to rap, for example, while singing psalms a cappella on Sunday. I know that church and nature should be distinct, but I don't see how people can like certain types of music in their civic life while singing sober a cappella psalms on Sunday. So he thinks that certain rap music or certain types of music just tend toward immorality, and I don't think making a formal distinction between church worship and music and civil life would work for someone who materially has to live in both worlds, and he wants to know what we think and so forth. So I think that's an interesting question. It comes up, too, in light of a recent episode when we talked about our favorite movies, and I got communication from a devoted listener who was disappointed in our movie choices, or at least some of our movie choices. So we've been going back and forth, corresponding, talking about this issue, which I think is related. So I don't feel entirely qualified to talk about rap music. I have like 3 hip-hop songs in the thousands of songs on my phone. I have a little playlist, a little hip-hop playlist. It's really, really old stuff from the very early days of hip-hop, and I don't even know that it qualifies as rap, maybe in the broadest sense. I'm at that stage in life when I hear somebody's woofer thumping in their trunk as they go by and sort of wipe out the conversation I'm having with my wife, and I think, turn it down. Back in my day, that was against the law.
You know what they say, if it's too loud, you're too old.
Exactly.
That being said, I often think it's too loud.
Exactly. That's if it was the Stones or something, I'd think, okay, that song needs to be cranked up or something. But anyway, so maybe it's cultural, and I mean, and obviously There are rock and roll songs that are disgusting and probably don't deserve to be listened to, and there are rap songs that are disgusting. When you're calling for the death of police officers, that's not an edifying thing, or not particularly good art, even if it reflects maybe suggests we should pay attention to people and listen to their grievances, and maybe witnesses to the fact that that folks have been mistreated. So that needs to be considered too. But if you listen carefully to a lot of great rock and roll songs, they're about being tired about being on the road, wanting to have conjugal relations with someone, and or dancing. Those are basically the three things, or how much I miss you, or something like that. And some of those songs are worth listening to, and some of them you think, on third or fourth or fifth or 100th hearing, that song is artistically a little dubious. But does that condemn an entire genre? I guess that's the question.
Yeah, if you were to look at every song that we listen to in all the genres, whether it's rock, whether it's country, whether it's hip hop, whether it's R&B,
country,
whether it's rap,
Conway Twitty, nobody was more lurid and suggestive and really, frankly, kind of pervy.
Yeah, most music is about violating one of the 10 commandments or more. So, I mean, you could just say don't listen to music anymore. Classical music is always a good go-to because there's no words and you can just listen to what you like. But it's really hard to condemn people for listening to the music that sounds good to them. But if you really start listening to the lyrics or look up the lyrics, most music is really not that good for you to be listening to. But
most is a pretty broad category.
Well, I was listening to some R&B yesterday, and then I listened to the lyrics, and I said, probably not good. Next song.
Oh, interesting.
And then a rap song came on, and I listened to the lyrics, and I said, oops, nope, not that one. And then I changed to rock, and I was like, not this one. So, I mean, the point is, if you really listen.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's true. That's why I wanted to discuss this. I think it's an interesting question. I think the broader question is, how do we navigate life in a world where most of what we consume is produced by people who don't believe in Jesus, don't share our commitment to the moral law of God and our pursuit of virtue and all of those things? How far do you go in sort of cutting yourself off? Because this is the discussion I'm having with my correspondent, and I'm saying, well, when Paul says separate yourself from sexually immoral people, in 1 Corinthians, I think it's 6, he says, I'm not talking about people in the world. If you did that, you'd have to leave the world. And the implication is that's absurd. I'm talking about people in the church. He was objecting to, or challenging me, I guess, what is the line? And I said, I think we end up drawing the line in different places. Some people probably shouldn't and can't watch The Godfather. It's not good for them. And I said, well, are you in danger of apostatizing? Are you a weaker brother? And in that case, then I have certain obligations according to the Apostle Paul. But if you're not, then I can eat meat offered to idols. Right? That's my way of, at least one way of thinking about that.
Yeah, I tend to look up movies on a couple of different websites, have like parents' guides, and although I'm not using it for my kids, if they name certain things in them, I don't watch them.
Yeah.
But to the question in front of us, there's actually a couple of different questions here, which we need to, I think, keep clearly in front of us, because one of them is about if particular forms of music are inherently wrong. And then the second one is, how does that work?
Yeah.
In terms of why can I listen to some of this in civic life and not use it in church?
Yeah.
So it says, I don't think making a formal distinction between church worship and music and civil life would work for someone who materially has to live in both worlds. But an assumption built into that statement is that these two kinds of music are meant to serve the same function, which they are not.
Yeah.
Which doesn't yet get to the content, but this is actually a first question, even though it comes second in how you read it, because church music we need to sing together.
Yes.
And to the Lord and to one another.
It's not a rock concert. When we're gathered for corporate worship, it's not for entertainment. It's not to be blissed out listening to trance music. we're responding to the Word of God, ideally with the Word of God.
It's not for consumption necessarily.
Yeah.
It's actually for output.
Yeah.
It's for praise and mutual building up.
And it has to be suitable for that.
Yeah.
And it isn't always, he says somber. I don't know that it always has to be somber. I mean, sometimes the Psalms are quite exuberant, and our singing should, and our tunes should reflect that.
I think he said sober.
Sober, yes.
So, I mean, there's kind of it's almost like, well, what's the difference between a campfire song and a rap song? It's like, well, it's very hard to do one around the campfire.
Can you give us an example of a campfire song?
I think
And by that I mean,
I
please
think
sing
he's
it.
singing Kumbaya, isn't he?
No, it only takes a spark.
Oh, right.
It only takes a spark. That's a classic.
Divine spark within.
I'm not even going to try to sing it, but I do know it.
Yeah.
So I think use, what is the intended use? And a lot of the music that is under discussion here isn't meant for use in public worship, which needs to fit certain particular needs.
Yeah.
Whereas music you listen to in everyday life is fine for your private, help, entertainment, whatever it does for you,
As long as it doesn't cause you to sin, right? I mean, that's...
Well, and then you come to the form of it. So he has asked, are there inherently sinful forms of music?
So is the backbeat in a rock song, is that inherently wicked? And I don't think so. I've never thought that was a compelling argument.
Well, I think there's another question here that needs to be asked. So I actually did start college as a music major.
Yeah.
Sort of to throw
you're the
hidden
right guy
card on
to,
the
to
table.
talk about this.
Bring the ponytail back.
Yeah, I don't want to do that. And I don't know that sinful is the most precise word to stick there,
Or the right category.
because some forms of music are inherently better and some might be more out of order than others. That can be, but having a poorly arranged piece of music isn't exactly sin.
No, exactly, but it is rubbish. I mean,
Yeah.
So I'm deeply offended by Muzak, and I'm deeply offended by a lot of the glop that passes for contemporary Christian music now. Right? I used to complain about "Shine Jesus Shine," and then the students said that's too out of date. You have to
That's a
complain about
classic hymn.
a more up-to-date, it's a classic hymn now. You have to complain about a more up-to-date song. So then I complained about "Oh How He Loves Me,"
Yikes.
Otherwise known as "Sloppy Wet Kiss" in the original version, and now that was out of date. So I said, well, give me some songs, and they gave me, this is a few years ago now, 3 songs, and I went and looked them up, and they were just Muzak. I mean, I don't know who did them or what they were or what they said. It was just Muzak, and just on aesthetic grounds, I thought this is complete rubbish. And
But that doesn't mean it's sinful.
no, I was offended aesthetically.
Thomas Kincaid might be lame to a lot of people, but that doesn't mean it's sinful.
That's right. That's right. So sin and righteousness are not the only tools in our toolbox. There's wisdom, there's beauty, right? Other categories to use to analyze these things.
But then, following to that, in his question, there's a distinction missing. There's form and content.
Yeah.
So some content is inherently sinful.
Yes.
If it's about sinful things.
That's right. Yeah. If you're singing about adultery or glorifying adultery anyway.
Yeah, glorifying any immorality. But
me and
you
Mrs.
can
Jones.
within a proper form of music, and different styles of music have their own proper forms.
Yes.
Even different scales. I mean, different cultures even have different scales that are pleasing in terms of hanging notes together. And I don't know that that's, I mean, I can't bring myself to say it's sinful.
No, that's just a function of nature.
Yeah. And there's nothing wrong in my view that Eastern cultures hang different notes together as a scale than we do in the West.
So maybe grace doesn't collapse nature.
It doesn't. But you could plug sinful content into any form. Now, it's fine for people not to appreciate certain forms, but regardless of the form, we should disapprove of sinful content.
Yeah.
And we should probably not condemn any form without additional reason just because some instances within that form have sinful content.
I think that's helpful because I can listen to bluegrass instrumental all day long, but then as soon as there's words, I can't do it anymore.
Oh, interesting.
Not that it's sinful. I just can't stand it.
Preference is a real category in life, and we don't like to reckon with that. We like to pretend that my preference is, downloaded
Objectively
from the
the
mind
thing.
of God.
Yeah, well said.
Yeah, I'm a huge Al Green fan, and some of his songs.
Put a little love in your heart.
Yeah, exactly. Some of the songs are probably more edifying than others. Although off the top of my head, I can't think of anything that's particularly lurid or what have you.
Wasn't there like a difference between earlier Al Green and later Al Green? Didn't he become a Christian?
Well, he's a minister.
Right.
What?
So
I did not know that.
Okay, on my hip hop playlist, I have MC Hammer. You can't touch this. MC Hammer, Too Legit to Quit, and Pray, and Ice Ice Baby.
That's great.
Oh man,
That's outstanding.
That's what I don't.
So you stopped listening to that kind of music in 1992.
Well, see, we were out of the country for a little bit, and there's this weird gap in my cultural knowledge. So I missed some things for about 5 years.
did you know that Vanilla Ice is now a landscaper?
Yeah, he's a real estate mogul or something. Yeah,
Yeah, he's like
He does landscaping in Miami or maybe Daytona. He still does concerts and stuff, but he has a show where he landscapes people's yard, and you can tell he loves it. It's the wildest thing.
He also
and you
had a
can
real
tell
estate
that I
show.
found it transfixing.
yeah, it was reality TV. So I don't know what happened to MC Hammer though. He sort of disappeared.
He's still around.
Is he?
Yep. He does what he wants to do. He's legit.
He's
Too legit.
Yeah, too legit.
To quit. He
Yeah,
can't
exactly.
quit
Oh, anyway.
because he's too legit.
So these songs are all fine. There's nothing in them that's morally objectionable. Somebody might object to the music because they don't like the beat or whatever, but that's a matter of taste, not a matter of morality or ethics.
As long as you're listening to it, because once you watch those videos, those pants are sinful.
Yeah. Now that the Bishop of Rome has died, we get to see the Swiss guards. So as we're recording, this is just a couple of days after the death of the Bishop of Rome. And so now we're seeing pictures of the Swiss guards, and I think those guys are fantastic because they're supposed to be heavily armed. And I can't tell by looking at them where exactly their weapons are.
Maybe
But
that's the point.
Those pants are right out of, probably 1583, but they look like they're from 1983. They're outstanding. Balloon pants. They're older than you thought, listener. Okay, I think we've done that one.
Call or text now. 760-618-1563.
You got some letters.
Yeah, we do. Here we go. This one is from Anonymous, who says, I'm Reformed, but I struggle with something, the perpetual virginity of Mary. I personally do not hold to it, even though I'm aware that it has been a part of the Reformed standard. We'll come back to that. That's not strictly true, but we'll come back to that. Still, I cannot say that I've ever heard a convincing argument for it. Every argument I've encountered seems to fall into one of the categories. She says she means 3 categories. Emotional, I just can't imagine her consummating her marriage.
And we definitely shouldn't imagine that.
Yeah, probably shouldn't be thinking about that. It's not really none of our business in that regard. Theological, because the act of consummation makes you defiled is another argument that people make. And then third, from silence or implication or leaps. Joseph had a whole life before Mary. The siblings were Mary's sisters, etc. And Anonymous says, I just don't see any argument that seems good enough to justify belief in the perpetual virginity of Mary. And I responded at length saying, basically, you're right. Anonymous, as far as I can tell, is correct. There are a few minor confessions and one major confession that mention the perpetual virginity. The only major that I can find is the Second Helvetic in chapter 11, where the confession affirms the perpetual virginity, the ever Virgin Mary, and then the others are very minor, one of whom I'd never heard of before, until I did this search. I don't know anything about it, so I don't think it has a lot of authority. But in the Heidelberg, the Belgic, the Canons, and the Westminster Standards, in none of those standards that are still widely used and authoritative in the life of the churches, confessional churches, and we don't confess it. And I think today most people would regard the doctrine of the perpetual virginity as speculative, without foundation.
Most Protestants, at least.
Most Protestants, yeah, without foundation in Scripture, and somewhat tendentious in the way that they have to dismiss Jesus' relatives. Well, it says brothers, but it doesn't really mean brothers. And when you find yourself making that kind of an argument, then you're in trouble, right? You end up tying yourself into knots, trying to explain how it's not really what it seems to say, because you know a priori something else is right. So this debate goes all the way back to Jerome and Helvidius. And Calvin, for example, lambasts Helvidius, but he doesn't actually make any arguments. He just yells at Helvidius. And sides with Jerome, which is interesting. But today, most Protestants, I think, agree with Helvidius that, in fact, Mary did not remain virgin, or she was not ever virgin, as some of our documents say. So, yes, it is as a matter of history. It's a fact. It is a part of our tradition, and it was the majority view in the church for a very long time, but it's not held anymore. And there we are. So maybe one of the questions is, what do you do in these cases when we've changed our minds?
Well, if you're Presbyterian, you didn't change your mind.
Well, that's a good point. Well, I mean, in a sense we did. I mean, if you ask earlier Presbyterians, there were probably a good number of them who thought that was the case.
Was the 1560 confession? I don't think they believed in that.
Well, yeah, exactly. And I mean, very few of us actually confessed it, but if you read the personal writings or various treatises and things, you will see.
My guess is Knox didn't, but that's just a guess.
Which I take to mean, if we didn't confess it, we didn't have a view to it formally as a body.
Officially, yeah, that's right. The churches did not take it up and impose it and say this is a clearly taught or implied doctrine that Christians in our churches are obligated to believe.
Which I then take to mean you're allowed to disagree with one another.
Right. They didn't think it was that important.
Yeah. So if it's, to get to the, you hear the topic, and you've answered that. But, in this question, it also seems like there's the personal struggle too. How do you fit yourself into the tradition regarding disagreeing with a lot of people who held this? Well, one, it's the perpetual virginity. I mean, the virgin birth is an article of faith.
That's right.
But the perpetual virginity.
So let's be clear about that. That's not in question.
Yeah.
The Blessed Virgin, she is blessed, and we confess as a matter of our undoubted holy Christian faith, the virgin conception of our Lord Jesus Christ.
That's right.
Right. That's a biblical truth. It's a ecumenical, creedal truth, right, that all Christians are obligated to believe. But the question is, what should we think or say about the Blessed Virgin after that?
Right, remaining one her whole life. And so that is not an article of faith.
Yeah.
And it is not an article in the standards of any of our churches.
Yeah.
And so then at that point, I say there's lots of things where you're allowed to think another believer is mistaken.
Yeah.
And that doesn't call into question that you ought to consider each other believers and be fine with that.
Yeah.
And, even within our own distinct congregations. And this is something that's really hard for us a lot of times. Back to the same issue that was part of the second question is we have this impulse to think our preferences or even the things that we have a strong mind that go beyond a preference, that this has to be from the mind of God. And we are all in trouble if there's disagreement. And this plays out in, tastes like in music, but also civic issues and sometimes things that are genuinely doctrinal. But this is one where it seems to be like, well, some Reformed people did believe this. And I think they were mistaken.
Yeah.
But I also don't have to be incredibly troubled by the fact that they were mistaken about it.
Isn't it one of the pieces of this larger picture of Mary that includes the Immaculate Conception and the fact that she never sinned and the fact that she was assumed into heaven, like, aren't they all kind of one pieces of that bigger picture, which is why it's important to say, no,
I
she
would
did
question that.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm not arguing against, but I just, until I see all of the, I trust the reformers that they were trying to think through these issues in depth. I mean, I've heard that, you know, when I think it was Matthew Henry, somebody brought to me one time and said, this sounds like he's saying, Mary, you know, remained a virgin. I was like, well, he probably thought that's there's at least a good chance. Yeah. And maybe I'm mistaken about who the commentator was, but it was a 17th century commentator, and that's, you know, from our tradition, and that's the point, that he was articulating this view. And somebody else said, well, maybe that's a holdover from Roman Catholicism. I said, I don't know if I'm ready to concede that. He may have still thought this was true with very different premises and implications.
Okay.
Yeah.
From those held by Rome. That doesn't mean that I think he was right. I think he's mistaken to have argued for the perpetual virginity, but it doesn't have to be bound in to all of the other Roman affirmations about Mary, which did not become dogma until Vatican I. Yeah. Which is an important point, I think, to keep in mind.
It's very late. Yeah, that's very late. Also, isn't this something like traducianism? Right? If you look in the older Reformed writers, a lot of our guys are traducianists. They think the soul is transmitted biologically from parents to children. This is pretty widely held, but not anything that we confess. Today, if you ask people, you know, and this also connects to the transmission of sin, right? But today, if you ask most Reformed people and Reformed theologians, they would adopt the creationist position, which actually, as a matter of history, this doesn't mean that it's false. Hold the creationist view. It comes from Pelagius, or at least he's the first one that I know of who taught it, that the soul is created immediately by the Holy Spirit, or by God anyway. So most of us are creationists. Most of us are not traducianists today. So we probably have a stronger view of the imputation of sin now rather than the transmission of sin, if you will. Right. So there are different ways in which we say things differently now than we did 400 or 500 years ago on different topics. Most people in the 16th century believed that God created in something like 6 24-hour days. Today, some of us do and some of us don't. Right? We've had time to think about these things and come to different conclusions.
You guys are smart.
Yeah, part of the outcome here is we need to be less troubled when we disagree.
Yeah.
And how can I, if part of the question is, how can I hold this position without pride and without feeling like I'm placing myself above the entire church? Well, hold your view and realize you might be mistaken.
That's right.
And if not on this thing, you might be mistaken on something else. And that's okay. We can keep going.
Doesn't this point to the value of the confessions? Right?
Indeed.
So the things on which we are obligated to agree are those things that we've confessed together. We don't confess this, therefore we're not obligated to agree. And so we disagree charitably, graciously. If somebody holds to the perpetual virginity of the Blessed Virgin, that's fine. More power to you. And I'm happy to live with you.
It's kind of weird, but it's fine.
Yeah.
Scott will look at you slightly askance, but he'll love you nonetheless, right?
Yes.
Thanks for listening. Tune in tomorrow for more from the Heidelcast, brought to you by Heidelberg Reformation Association.org. Don't forget, when the coin in the coffer clinks, the cost of bandwidth shrinks. Copyright Heidelberg Reformation Association. All rights reserved. This is a Heidel Media production.